That night, Heather sent her dad a short text. "Look at me. Dad, I can drive now." She just learned how to drive a stick shift, her voice full of excitement. A few hours later, that same car was found by the riverbank. The doors were locked. Her purse still sat on the front seat. Her phone had gone completely silent, and Heather was nowhere to be found. In Myrtle Beach, everyone knows everyone. But no one knew what really happened to the 20-year-old girl that night. Her father kept calling again and again, only to hear the cold, endless ring on the other end. "Sweetheart, please call me back. I'm so worried." What started as an ordinary date quickly spun out of control. And from that moment on, the name Heather Elvis became a haunting memory that still lingers over the entire town. Myrtle Beach, they call it the city of sun, sand, and smiles. By day, the eastern shore buzzes with crashing waves and the steady beat of music pouring from beach bars that never seem to close. Thousands of tourists flood in, eating seafood, laughing loudly, taking photos under the neon lights. It feels like a place that never sleeps. But just a few miles west, the air changes. The streets narrow and quiet, shaded by oak trees. Old wooden houses sit still, holding on to the breath of an older South. Here, people live slowly. They know each other's faces, each other's stories. They cherish their calm, and sometimes they keep their distance from anything that comes from the other side, where the glow of tourism fades. Heather Elvis grew up in that quieter West. She was the oldest of 3 kids, polite yet full of spirit. Friends remembered her as the girl who always smiled, always knew how to make you feel comfortable when you talked to her. At 20, Heather was already independent. After finishing high school, she moved out with her best friend, Brianna Warland. The 2 girls rented a tiny apartment, decorating it with thrift store finds and Polaroid photos taped all over the walls. They lived simply, worked hard, and shared soft-spoken dreams about their future. Heather worked as a waitress at a bar called the Tilted Kilt, where girls in short skirts served beer to tourists. Every night she came home late, her hair carrying the smell of smoke and fryer oil. But she always texted her parents, "I'm home." The job wasn't easy, but Heather never complained. She saved every dollar to pay rent and to take makeup classes, something she truly loved. "I'm going to be a makeup artist," she once told her dad. "I just want to help people feel confident, feel beautiful." Her roommate Brianna often joked, if someone ever breaks Heather's heart, she won't cry for long. By morning, she'll put on her lipstick, smile again, like nothing ever happened. Between the 2 faces of Myrtle Beach, the loud laughter of tourists and the quiet rhythm of locals, Heather was like a bridge connecting those worlds. She carried the brightness of youth and the gentleness of home. No one knew that this very contrast between glitter and stillness would soon become the backdrop of her tragedy. On the night of December 17, 2013, Heather was getting ready for a date she'd been looking forward to for weeks. The guy she was about to meet was Stephen, someone she'd recently connected with on Instagram. They hadn't known each other long, but Heather told her roommate Brianna that he was funny, easy to talk to, and honest. Brianna still remembers that afternoon. Heather spent hours picking out an outfit. She tried on 3 different dresses before settling on a simple cream-colored sweater. "Don't dress like you're going to work," Brianna teased. "Just be yourself." Heather laughed, snapped a selfie, and sent it to her friend before heading out. That night, the 2 had dinner at a small downtown restaurant. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but for Heather it felt special. She texted Brianna throughout the evening, even from inside the car with Stephen. "He's teaching me how to drive stick," she wrote. "I've never been able to do it before." Near midnight, Heather sent one last picture sitting in the driver's seat, smiling under the soft glow of the dashboard lights. The message read, "Look at me, I did it." Later that night, Stephen dropped her off at her apartment on White River Drive. He said goodbye, then drove away. Around 11:55 p.m., Brianna received Heather's final text. "Had so much fun. I'm home safe." That was the last time anyone ever heard from her. The next morning, Brianna woke early to leave town for the holidays. Before heading out, she scribbled a quick note for Heather. "When I'm back, let's go get breakfast." The note stayed right there on the table, never read. Police would later say there were no signs that Heather was in danger that night. No screams, no strange noises, no cameras catching anything unusual, just a normal evening. Two young people out on a date, laughing, driving, saying goodbye. Nothing out of the ordinary, but only a few hours later, Heather's car was found in a place no one expected, abandoned near a desolate river landing, almost 12 miles from her home. And that's when the first chilling question emerged, the one that still echoes today. That night, besides Stephen, was someone else watching Heather Elvis? 2 days after the date, in the early hours of December 19, 2013, a patrol officer from Horry County drove past Peachtree Landing, a small quiet riverside spot where locals usually went fishing or to watch the sunrise. He noticed a green Dodge Intrepid parked by the edge of the road. The engine was off. The lights were off. No one was around. It was cold that night, wind whispering through bare trees. Nothing unusual enough to make him stop. He glanced once, then kept driving. The next morning, a local resident called the police. The same car was still there, in the exact same spot. When officers returned to check the plate, it came back registered to Terry Elvis of Carolina Forest. The moment they called, Terry knew. It was his daughter's car. He rushed to the river landing carrying a spare key. When Terry opened the door, the first thing he saw was a small beige purse resting neatly on the passenger seat. Inside were Heather's wallet, ID, house keys, and phone. There were no signs of struggle. No broken glass, no mess. The driver's seat was pushed far back, as if someone had just stepped out and never came back. Terry stood there in silence, looking around. A thin layer of fog drifted over the still water. The landing was eerily quiet, only the faint sound of branches snapping and falling into the river. He tried to picture what his daughter had been doing there, why she would drive to such a lonely place in the middle of the night. Police found no footprints, no tire tracks, no traces of anyone else. Everything was too clean, too still, and frighteningly so. As night fell, Terry sat inside the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel, staring into the pitch-black water ahead. He kept telling himself she'd just gone somewhere, that she'd be back soon. But deep down there was a cold, sinking feeling he couldn't name. It was like she just stepped out of the car for a moment and vanished forever. That was the moment everything began, the moment a father realized he might have lost his daughter, and the moment the investigation into Heather Elvis officially began. That night, after the police left, Terry sat alone in the living room. Heather's phone lay silent on the table, powered off. He opened his laptop and logged into the family's phone account. They shared the same plan, so he could see every call made that night. Then something caught his eye and a string of repeated numbers. 9 calls, all to the same person within just a few minutes. Right before Heather's phone went dark, his heart began to pound. Terry grabbed his phone and dialed the number. It rang a few times, then a rough male voice answered. "Hello?" Terry steadied his voice. "This is Heather Elvis's father. My daughter called you that night. I just need to know, where is she?" A brief silence. Then the man's tone shifted, heavier, harsh, and filled with anger. He started cursing, yelling, and then abruptly hung up. Terry froze. He called back. This time no one answered. Something inside him stirred, a father's instinct whispering that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, he brought the number to the police. They traced it quickly. The name came back, Sydney Moorer, a 38-year-old man living with his wife and 3 kids on the outskirts of Myrtle Beach. Sydney wasn't a family friend. He wasn't anyone Heather had ever mentioned. When investigators went to the Tilted Kilt, Heather's workplace, and asked about the name, the reaction was the same across the room. One co-worker looked down, paused for a moment, then quietly said, "If you really want to know what happened, you need to talk to Sydney Moorer." The man on the other end of that call wasn't just some stranger. He was a married man, one who had something to hide. The man on the other end wasn't just anyone. He was a husband with secrets to hide. From that moment on, the name Sydney Moorer began to appear in every report, every interview, and every sleepless night for the Elvis family. What they didn't know yet was that behind that man stood someone else, his wife, Tammy, the woman who would turn a secret affair into a nightmare with no way out. At the time, Sydney Moorer was 38. He owned a small repair business called Palmetto Maintenance, specializing in fixing equipment for restaurants around Myrtle Beach. On the surface, he seemed ordinary, a husband, a father of 3, living in a suburban home with a wide yard, a white fence, and a framed family photo hanging by the entrance. To neighbors, they were the picture of a stable, comfortable couple. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. But behind that picture-perfect life was another story. Sydney first met Heather while doing maintenance work at the Tilted Kilt. She was cheerful, outspoken, and full of energy, and he noticed her right away. To Heather, Sydney seemed mature, attentive, the kind of man who actually listened, something she hadn't found before. Their text messages soon crossed the line from casual to personal. It started with harmless compliments. "You've got a great smile today." Then came flirtations, breakfast plans, coffee dates, exchanged photos. Heather told her best friend she believed it was real love. She didn't think about his wife or the complications that came with him. To her, Sydney was kind, gentle, and steady, so different from the boys her age. But the truth was far darker. By October, Tammy, Sydney's wife, found out. And instead of leaving him, she chose to control him completely. Tammy forced Sydney to call Heather in front of her, to say cruel things he didn't mean. "I never loved you. You were just a joke." Heather listened quietly on the other end. She didn't argue. She just cried. From that moment on, Sydney's life was no longer his own. Tammy changed the passwords on his phone, burned everything connected to Heather, and made him tattoo her name across his stomach, a mark of ownership he could never erase. She tied him to the bed at night, made him go everywhere with her, and forbade him from speaking to anyone she didn't approve of. Neighbors recalled that after the affair came to light, the Moorer house stayed lit late into the night, sometimes filled with shouting, sometimes eerily quiet before exploding again. Tammy claimed she had forgiven him, but everyone knew. It wasn't forgiveness. It was punishment, slow, suffocating, and unrelenting. And within that jealousy turned obsession, Heather Elvis, the young woman who once believed in love, became a name spoken only in hate night after night inside that house. 1:35 a.m., December 18, 2013. At a nearly empty gas station on 10th Avenue, a security camera captured a man stepping into a payphone booth. He wore a dark jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, half of his face hidden in shadow. That man was Sydney Moorer. Just 20 minutes earlier, surveillance footage from a nearby Walmart showed him buying a single item, a pregnancy test. No one could explain why a married man would need something like that in the middle of the night. But later, investigators learned Heather had suspected she might be pregnant. The call from that payphone lasted exactly 5 minutes. The person on the other end was Heather Elvis. Inside her small apartment, Heather answered, her voice trembling. On the line, Sydney told her he had left his wife. He said he wanted to see her again, that things were different now, Heather cried. Moments later, she texted her best friend, Brianna, who was in Florida at the time. He says he left Tammy, he wants to see me. Brianna replied almost instantly, don't go. Heather, please don't go back to him. But there were no more messages after that. Around 2:29 a.m., Heather called the payphone back. No answer. At 3:16 a.m., she called Sydney directly. The call lasted 4 minutes, then her phone began to move, leaving her apartment and heading toward Peachtree Landing, the same place police would later find her car. At 3:30 a.m., she tried to call Sydney once more. No one picked up. By 3:42 a.m., her phone went completely dark, no signal, no trace. At that same moment, a roadside camera captured a black Ford F-150 driving toward the river landing, later confirmed to belong to Sydney Moorer. Half an hour later, the truck reappeared, heading the opposite direction, vanishing into the night. No more footage, no more calls, just silence, a void where everything stopped. That was the moment she vanished, and the night swallowed the truth forever. After Heather disappeared, word spread quickly through Myrtle Beach. The whole town was talking. Some said she'd run away. Others whispered that someone had taken her. But amid the noise, another voice rose, the voice of Tammy Moorer. On Facebook, Tammy painted herself as the victim. She wrote that Heather was the other woman, that she had tried to destroy a family, and that all accusations against Sydney were lies. Tammy posted photos of her and Sydney holding hands, smiling, walking together, the picture of a happy, unbreakable couple. Meanwhile, Heather, the missing girl, became the villain in someone else's story. And the most chilling part was that some people believed it. Friends, neighbors, even strangers online began defending Tammy, saying she was just a betrayed wife, trying to protect her marriage. Social media twisted the truth, splitting the community in half. Those who mourned Heather and those who said she got what she deserved. The police stayed silent. No comments, no denials, just quiet observation and patience. Weeks later, they obtained a search warrant for the Moorer home. When investigators entered, the house was spotless, too spotless. No trace of Heather. No suspicious papers. Nothing out of place. But out back they found something else. A new security camera system, installed just 2 days after Heather vanished. When detectives examined the footage, one video sent chills through the room. It showed Sydney and Tammy standing beside their black Ford F-150, the same truck captured on roadside cameras the night Heather disappeared. They were wiping the inside of the cab, the seats, the steering wheel, the door handles, slowly, methodically, in silence. No words, no eye contact, only the rhythmic sound of wet cloth against metal, over and over again. When they were done, Tammy gathered all the rags, walked into the yard, and set them on fire. The small flame flickered, lighting her face in a cold orange glow. The narrator's voice drops, low, steady, chilling. They weren't cleaning the truck. They were erasing a secret. From that moment on, suspicion turned into certainty. Heather Elvis hadn't just vanished. Someone had made her disappear. In 2016, nearly 3 years after Heather vanished, the case finally went to trial. The courtroom was packed. In the front row, Heather's parents sat side by side, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed forward. Across from them sat Sydney Moorer, the man who once laughed with their daughter over coffee, now silent, avoiding every gaze in the room. At first, Sydney wasn't on trial for murder, but for obstruction of justice. He had denied ever calling Heather from the payphone that night, but the surveillance footage, showing him stepping into the booth, lifting the receiver, shattered that lie. When the prosecutor asked, "Why did you need to use a payphone instead of your own?" Sydney looked down and said nothing. The court sentenced him to 10 years in prison, the maximum penalty for obstruction. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. 2 years later, Tammy Moorer stood trial. She was charged with the kidnapping of Heather Elvis. Throughout the proceedings, Tammy remained stone-faced, occasionally smirking as the charges were read aloud. Her defense argued, "No body, no crime." But the prosecutor replied, "A body can disappear, but the evidence of deceit never does." The trial lasted 11 days. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before delivering their verdict: guilty. Tammy Moorer was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Soon after, it was Sydney's turn again, this time also for kidnapping. No one knew what his defense would be until a surprise witness took the stand, Donald DiMarino, Sydney's cousin. Donald testified that Sydney had once shown him a photo on his phone, a picture of Heather, her face bruised and bloodied. "When I asked who it was," Donald said softly, "he just told me she's gone." The courtroom fell silent. Sydney didn't move, didn't deny, didn't nod. He just stared at the wooden floor. When the verdict was read, 30 years in prison, he remained expressionless. No confession, no apology, no explanation. No one knew whether his silence was denial or admission. 2 people were convicted but neither confessed. Justice, at least on paper, had been served. But for the Elvis family, what they truly longed for, the truth about what happened that night, remained buried in the heavy silence of 2 people who once claimed to be in love. 12 years have passed since the night Heather Elvis disappeared. Time has gathered dust over the case files, the headlines, the old articles scattered across the internet. But for the Elvis family, everything is still frozen. At 3:42 a.m., the moment Heather's phone went silent, and their lives stopped with it. Every year on December 18th, Heather's father, Terry, drives back to Peachtree Landing. He brings a small bouquet of flowers, places it gently on the patch of ground where her car was found. Then he sits quietly for hours, watching the river shimmer under the pale light of dawn. The wind moves softly through the trees, carrying the scent of salt and damp grass. No one speaks. There's nothing left to say. When asked in a recent interview, Terry's answer was brief. his voice rough, steady, and tired. "I've never given up hope. I'll bring her home, one way or another. Outside the courthouse, some say justice has already been served. But for those who truly loved Heather, justice still feels incomplete, because there is still no grave to lay flowers on, and no real answer to what happened that final night.